What if every soul that has ever lived is still reflected in the mirror of one man's sorrow? What if a single pane of ancient glass still remembers the faces of those it once beheld, prophets, kings, angels, and shadows, each one etched not in silver but in silence? And what if that silence is growing louder night after night, waiting for someone to listen? There are mirrors that show only your face, and there are mirrors that show your fate, but this was not such a mirror. No, this was older, quieter, hungrier, not of crystal, nor obsidian, nor polished metal. This mirror was born of command, not crafted by hand. It was summoned, whispered into existence by one who had spoken with the jinn and walked among the angels. A mirror breathed into being by the very name of Solomon. And still, no one knows where it sleeps. They say it was never meant to be found, that it was buried not beneath sand, but beneath time, beneath memory itself. That it was hidden when the world could no longer bear to see itself truly. But it is said quietly, in dreams, in wind, in the breath between two verses of the Quran, that Solomon's mirror still exists. And it remembers, not just faces, not just hearts, but the truth behind the lies that even prophets dare not speak aloud. It showed everything, every soul, every intention, every angel who faltered, and every king who fell in silence. And it began not in a palace, but in a place before palaces ever stood, before there were thrones and armies, before there were lies, before the floodwaters receded from the first temple stone, before even the winds could carry language. There was a child. He did not yet know the weight of the crown he would wear. He only knew the sound of his father's voice, a voice that trembled when it recited the names of the unseen. The child would sit at his father's feet, still as stone, watching the shadows dance on the temple walls. And sometimes in the dark he saw them shimmer, not the shadows, the stones. They would glisten not with water, not with fire, but with something else. Something like memory, something like prophecy. That child was Solomon, and even as a boy he could feel it, the hum of the world beneath the world, the secret language of the wind, the tension in the air when angels passed too close, and it frightened him. Not because he did not understand it, but because he did. The others called it a gift, but Solomon knew it was not a gift, it was a weight. And every night when sleep would not come, he would press his ear to the earth and listen. The earth spoke, not in words, in sorrow. It told him stories, stories of angels who could no longer rise, of jinn who had touched the sky and forgotten the ground, of cities buried not in sand but in shame. He listened. And the earth, knowing he would not forget, began to tell him more. It told him about a glass that had not yet been made but already existed, a mirror, but not a mirror like ours. This one would not show the face, only the soul, and it would only obey one voice, not a command spoken with lips but with tears. Solomon would not speak of it for many years, not to his father, not to his council, not even to the wind, which often listened. He hid the vision deep within the vault of his heart, where only the angels and the jinn dared not tread. But it waited, because the mirror was not of man's making, it was of divine reckoning. It would come when the world needed to be seen again, not by eyes but by hearts. And so Solomon grew, and the world changed. Kings rose, nations trembled, winds carried secrets and banners alike. The jinn built monuments, the angels wept in secret. And Solomon, now cloaked in wisdom and crowned in silence, began to dream of it again. The mirror, not a circle, not a square, a shape unlike anything known, curved yet endless, deep but without shadow, a reflection that returns not your image but your essence. He dreamt of it calling to him from the caves beneath the mountains, from the broken vaults of Babel, from the waters beneath the throne. He did not answer, not yet, because he feared what he might see within it. Not the souls of men, not the sins of jinn, but himself. The first time he saw the glass, truly saw it, he did not find it, it found him. He was alone, as kings must often be, in a place where the wind no longer carried sound, a garden once watered by angelic tears, forgotten by men, guarded by silence. And there, upon a stone that bore no inscription, it stood, not shimmering, not glowing, still, as if waiting. He did not reach for it, he only looked. And in that moment the breath caught in his chest, for he saw not one reflection but thousands, thousands of lives, thousands of eyes all staring back, some weeping, some are furious, some radiant, some hollow. One of them was his, not the boy, not the king, but the one in between, the one who still remembered the stories the earth had whispered to him. And then the glass breathed a sigh as if released from waiting, and Solomon fell to his knees. He did not cry, he did not pray, he only listened, because the mirror had begun to speak, but not in words, in memory, in the voices of those who were never heard, in the truth that was never spoken, in the light that never reached the temple doors. And as the moon rose high, hollow, watching, Solomon knew this mirror would show everything, but it would never lie, and it could never be broken, not by stone, not by time, not even by sorrow. If you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. They came to him in the stillest hour, not walking, not flying, but shimmering, like heat without flame, like smoke without fire. They did not bow. The jinn had bowed once, long ago, and never again. But before Solomon they stood quiet. For they knew this was not a man who merely ruled. This was a man who remembered. And memory to the jinn was more terrifying than power. He had summoned them not with spells, nor chains, nor ancient rites. He had summoned them by silence, a silence deeper than any word, heavier than command. A silence they recognized, for they had heard it once long ago when the heavens first trembled. And now they heard it again in Solomon. They called him Malik al-Ra, the king of spirits. Not because he ruled them, but because he understood them. And that frightened them more than any cage. He asked for nothing at first. Not towers, not treasure, not the secrets of flame or stone. He only asked one question: where does reflection go when no one is looking? The jinn did not answer, not because they did not know, but because they feared what it meant that he had asked. Because the jinn remembered the glass, not the mirror as it stood, but the mirror as it would become. For time to them was not a line but a spiral, and the future bled backwards into their breath. They had seen it in dreams, in smoke, in the eyes of fallen angels who no longer dared descend. A mirror that showed the soul, a mirror that broke the veil, and they knew if Solomon found it the world would change, not on fire but in sight. They did not want to see themselves. No one does, so they resisted him, subtly, silently. They built what he asked. Towers that kissed the wind, floors polished until the stars wept in their reflection, vaults sealed by names lost before the flood, but they never spoke of the mirror until the third night. Solomon did not sleep. He sat among olive trees, his robe soaked with dew, his fingers tracing verses into the dirt, and one of them came, not the strongest, not the oldest, but the most burdened, Azim. His name meant he who holds weight. And he had carried the silence of fire for 1,000 years. Azim knelt, not in submission, but in surrender. He whispered not with voice but with shadow, letting his form ripple like a memory trying to fade. And this is what he told Solomon: there is a mirror, but it is not made of glass. It is made of every eye that has ever turned away from the truth, every soul that has refused to see itself, every angel who wept when men forgot the stars. It was not created, it awoke. Solomon's eyes did not move. His hand stopped drawing. Azim continued, it lies beneath the city of brass, beneath the bones of a throne that was never claimed, guarded by silence, not by sword, guarded by memory, not by spell. You can only find it if you are willing to lose yourself. You can only touch it if you are ready to vanish. And then he said no more. The jinn left. The trees stopped breathing. And Solomon, alone once again, whispered to the night, let me see what cannot be seen. And something in the world shifted, not a sound, not a wind. But remembering, the stars pulsed once as if holding their breath. And then it began, a journey not of feet but of soul. Solomon did not march, he did not ride, he simply began to walk with no path, no map, no certainty, only memory. The world bent around him, deserts unfolded, winds parted, Stones that had not moved in centuries trembled at his passing. The earth remembered his name. And after 9 days, not counted by sun but by silence, he came to a place no man had named. A chasm in the shape of a wound in the shape of a mirror, cut into the earth like regret. He stood at its edge, and below there was no bottom, only reflection, not of the sky, not of light, but of something deeper, as if the void below was watching him. Waiting, he descended, not by rope, not by ladder, but by surrender. Each step downward stripped him, not clothing, not of the crown, but of certainty. He saw himself as a boy afraid of the wind. He saw himself as a king holding justice like a blade. He saw himself as a soul uncertain, unsaved. And still he walked, until the air no longer held sound, until the stone no longer held shape, until the world forgot it had ever been above him, and then he saw it, not in light but in absence, a shape, a presence, a memory carved in silence. The mirror, no frame, no edge, no shimmer, just a stillness so complete it hurt. And for the first time Solomon felt fear, not of what he would see, but of what would see him. He knelt. He placed his hand on the stone, and the mirror awakened, not with light, but with tears, thousands of them falling upward, as if every sorrow the world had buried was trying to return. He closed his eyes, and the mirror spoke, not in jinn tongue, not in angelic dialect, but in the voice of the earth itself, soft, broken, ancient, and it said, "Now you will see." And what he saw was not light, it was not even darkness. It was a third thing, something that had no name in any tongue men still remembered. It was the space between memory and silence. The edge where the soul becomes a shadow, where prayer becomes reflection. The mirror did not shimmer. It did not cast an image. It did not show beauty or ruin. It simply revealed. And what it revealed could not be spoken. Not then, not now, not even here, but I will try, because the night deserves to be remembered. He saw a garden before time had teeth, a place where every leaf remembered the voice that had sung it into being. Rivers ran with light, and the stones whispered in languages made of wind. A man stood in that garden, but not just any man, a first man with eyes full of fire. And standing behind him, just behind, was a shadow, not evil, not yet, just unseen. The mirror pulsed, and now the garden is gone. He saw a city built of bones and brass. Its towers reached so high they pierced clouds that no longer carried rain. The jinn had built it, but they had not stayed. They feared what they had made. Beneath its throne was a vault, and within that vault a room without walls, a room that could not be entered, only remembered. And Solomon understood the mirror had seen this place, and perhaps had been born from it, but before he could think more, the vision changed. He saw himself, not as king, not as a prophet, not even as a man. He saw himself as a memory, as a possibility. He saw the child who listened to the wind, the youth who wept at justice, the ruler who bore silence like armor. And he saw cracks, hairline fractures, moments of pride thin as breath, moments of sorrow heavy as planets. And he saw the moment not yet come when his hands would tremble, when he would lose what he most loved and gain what he feared most, a legacy. The mirror showed him the weeping of angels, not at sin, not at war, but forgetfulness. For the mirror had no hatred, no judgment, only memory. It showed the sky that had once held 7 thrones and now held only one. It showed a name never spoken, only wept that no mouth dared utter. It showed the tears of a mother who had buried a prophet. It showed the hands of a child who had fed an army with faith. It showed a breath, one single breath that held back the fire from heaven. And then it showed silence, a silence so complete it shattered sound. Solomon fell, not into the earth, but into himself, for the mirror had turned. It now reflected not the world, but his heart. And in that heart the mirror found echoes of every lie he had not told, of every truth he had not spoken, of every prayer he had whispered in fear, hoping it would not be heard. He saw the faces of those he had ruled, their gratitude, their resentment, their exhaustion. He saw the jinn, silent in chains, wondering if he was different from those before. He saw the angels, eyes downcast, waiting for him to falter or to rise. He saw his father not as king, but as a man weeping in the night, whispering words even scripture dared not record. And then he saw the glass crack, just once. A hairline fracture running across eternity, not a break, a prophecy. The mirror was not eternal. Nothing is, but the memory is. And Solomon understood the mirror was never meant to be kept. It was meant to be seen, once, and then hidden, because no soul can live long in full reflection. We were not made to carry such clarity. Even prophets bend beneath the light. When he rose, the mirror had vanished. Not broken, not buried, just returned to wherever it comes from, to wherever truth waits when the world is not ready. He did not speak of it again. He did not draw it. He did not name it. But from that day forward, his justice changed. It became softer, slower, more silent, as if he had seen what must never be spoken. And every time he passed a mirror, any mirror, he would pause, only for a breath, only for a glance, as if checking whether the memory remained. And in the years that followed, those who knew him best said, there was something in his eyes, something that saw more than the world allowed, something that could no longer unsee what it had once seen. They did not know why, but sometimes in dreams they heard his voice, softer than wind, sadder than rain, and he would whisper, the soul cannot lie to the glass, but the glass can break the soul. He died in silence, standing, leaning on his staff. The jinn did not know until the earth sent its smallest messenger, a creature without prophecy or name. And still, even in death, Solomon's face bore no fear, only memory, as if the mirror had never left him. As if he still carried it, and perhaps he did. Perhaps we all do. Somewhere hidden beneath bone and breath is a shard of that same mirror, the one that sees, the one that remembers, the one that cannot lie. And in the quiet hours just before sleep, when your breath grows slow and the world softens, listen. You may hear it whispering still, not in words, but in the stillness behind your thoughts, in the memory behind your name. There are some truths too heavy for wings. And there are mirrors too deep for angels. Before the mirror was ever seen by man, before Solomon had even drawn breath, before the jinn built cities and the prophets wept over stone tablets, there was a silence in the heavens, a silence that even the stars bowed to. And in that silence, a command. It did not roar. It did not echo. It simply existed, like gravity, like fate. And all who heard it obeyed, except two, not in rebellion, but in sorrow. Their names are no longer spoken. Not because they are forgotten, but because they are too remembered. Their story lives in the pauses between verses, in the ache between lines of scripture, in the hush of minarets just before dawn. They were angels, not fallen, not banished, just trembling, and they were told to look into the mirror, not Solomon's, the first mirror, the one the heavens held like a secret flame, the one that did not reflect light but origin. It was not made, it was not born, it simply was. A surface of nothingness so complete that anything shown within it became pure or shattered. The mirror was not a punishment, it was not a reward, it was true, and that is what they could not bear. The angels who refused did not do so with pride. They did not scoff or sneer, they wept. And in their weeping the sky dimmed, for the heavens had never seen refusal before. They asked softly, trembling, why must we see ourselves? For angels had only ever looked toward light, toward the throne, toward the names, but never back, never inward. And the mirror required just that, to look not at divinity, but at what divinity had left within you, and what it had left behind. These angels whose wings once wrapped around planets now folded them close. They trembled not with fear, but with grief. For they knew if they looked, they would see what even light cannot cleanse, doubt. A single note of question, not rebellion, not sin, just the slightest wondering. Was the mercy truly enough? Has justice been fully understood? Could they, creations of unwavering command, bear the image of choice? And in the mirror, choice is what they would see. Not their own, but the future of men, of jinn, of prophets and murderers, and in some quiet, echoing whisper of themselves. Because the mirror does not lie, even to angels, so they stepped back, not away from the throne, but from reflection. And the stars, sensing the hesitation, dimmed themselves in sympathy. The heavens grew quiet. The other angels said nothing. For in that sacred world, silence is not defiance, it is mourning. And in that moment something changed in the cosmos. A new rule was etched into the light: not all who serve are ready to see, and not all who see can continue to serve. The two angels did not fall. They did not burn. They were not torn from heaven. Instead, they were given something far more difficult. They were sent to earth, not in exile, in remembrance. To walk the soil of those who would one day be asked to reflect, to see up close the mercy they had doubted, to understand the weight of forgiveness not from above but from within. They came with wings that no longer bore stars, and feet that touched the dust, and eyes that could no longer look away. They became watchers, not judges, not messengers, witnesses to the rise and ruin of men, to the prayers said through cracked lips, to the hands that bled building altars and breaking them, to children born in the shadow of sorrow and still learning to laugh. And in each face they saw the mirror again, not in glass but in flesh. Each human being was a shard, some cracked, some sharp, some covered in layers of forgetting, but each still held a piece. And slowly, slowly the angels began to understand, not with thought but it aches, because that is how the earth teaches, not in verses, in wounds. And they began to love the very creatures they once feared to see, not for their purity, but for their struggle, not for their perfection, but for their return. The mirror had not punished them, it had prepared them, to walk beside those who would one day look and not shatter, to guard the forgotten, to mourn with the guilty, to guide the trembling, and to remind the heavens even angels can learn, even light must reflect. Some say the angels still walk among us, not in bodies, in the wind, in scents that come with no source, in a sudden warmth in a cold room, in a silence that makes your heart slow down just long enough to remember who you are. They do not speak, they do not shine. They only watch, and maybe, just maybe, they still carry the first mirror, not in their hands but in their eyes, waiting for the soul that no longer fears to see itself. The earth does not forget who has walked upon it. Every step leaves behind a kind of breath unseen but not unfelt. The ground holds memory the way the sky holds stars, and though the stars forget, the dust does not. And so the two angels, cloaked in bodies of silence and sorrow, walked, not with authority, not with glory, but with the weight of eyes that had almost looked into truth and had stepped away. They walked among shepherds and thieves, among poets and liars, among children who slept under starlight and mothers who mourned over unmarked graves. And everywhere they went, the mirror followed them, not in form, but in presence. It lingered like the scent of rain in places where it had never fallen, not a mirror of glass or metal, a mirror made of gaze. The way a man looked at his own hands after committing harm. The way a woman watched the moon and wondered if God still saw her. The way a child asked a question and waited for silence to answer. These were reflections, honest ones, more honest perhaps than anything ever seen in heaven. The angels learned the language of dust, not Arabic, not Hebrew, not the tongues of jinn or men. The true language, the one spoken when no one speaks. The voice of cracked hands holding water, of backs bent in prayer long after the world had turned away, of hearts that chose mercy when they had every right to rage. This was the voice of earth, and the angels wept, not in shame but in awe, because what they found was this: the soul of man reflects better than the wing of an angel, not because it is brighter but because it is broken, and only the broken reflect all light. The mirror they had once feared had shown them their doubt, but the people they now lived among showed them their hope, frail, flickering, but real. The mirror had been too perfect, too whole, and in its stillness it had terrified them. But in the trembling hands of those who believed, even when belief cost them everything, they saw something more beautiful than truth. They saw faith. And faith cannot be reflected, it can only be carried. There was an old man, nameless now, who lived beside a dry well. He had lost everything: his home, his children, even his voice. And still each morning he would walk to the well, bow his head and whisper something. The angels watched him for years. No water came, no miracles, No visions, only the sound of wind and the steady, stubborn prayer of a man whose heart refused to close. One night when the moon was sharp as sorrow, one of the angels knelt beside him, and for the first time since they had been cast to earth, he asked a question. "Why do you pray when no one answers?" The old man did not flinch. He only smiled, not with lips but with eyes, and he whispered back, "I do not pray to be heard. I pray so I do not forget how to listen." The angel trembled, not in fear but in reverence, for in that moment he understood something that the mirror had never shown. The greatest reflection is the one that lives inside silence. And so they began to collect these reflections, not in books, not in scrolls, but in presence. Every soul that had wept but not surrendered, every mother who forgave in secret, every wanderer who left behind gold to save a stranger. Every child lit a candle in the ruins and called it home. These became the new mirror, a mirror not made of vision but of a witness. It is said the angels now carry these reflections to the throne each night. They do not speak, they do not sing, they only release what they've seen, and the throne listens, and the heavens weep, because in the broken places of earth, truth has learned how to kneel. There is a place high in the mountains where it is said the angels sometimes appear, not in glory, not in light, but in shadow. They do not speak. They do not shine. They only sit beside those who are about to give up. And they remember, not their own sorrow, but the courage they once saw in the eyes of a dying child who had nothing left but a song. And sometimes, when the world is quiet enough, you can hear the angel whisper that song back, not in language, but in love. The mirror in the heavens still exists, but it is no longer shown because it is no longer needed. The angels found a better one, and it walks on two legs, and it stumbles and it bleeds, but it remembers the light even when it can no longer see it. There comes a moment even for the divine when the weight of sight becomes unbearable, not because of sin, not because of wrath, but because to see everything is to ache for everything. And so one night, one breathless, silent night, the heavens turned their gaze from earth, not in anger, in mercy, because too much light can blind, and sometimes the soul must grow in the shadow. The two angels, once trembling beneath the mirror, had now become its guardians. Not of the glass, it was gone, but of the memory, the reflection that lived now not in objects but in hearts. They had learned the names of every sorrow, the shape of every prayer that had no words, the taste of hunger so deep it became sacred, and they began to see something strange, something holy, that the ones furthest from light sometimes held the greatest pieces of it, the thief who wept when no one watched, the mother who fed others while her own stomach stayed hollow, the orphan who still prayed for the parent that had abandoned him. These were not saints, they were not chosen, but their hearts still reached toward something beyond the sky. And the angels who once feared the mirror now feared something else entirely, that the heavens had forgotten to watch. So they carried these reflections upward, night after night, until the silence above could no longer bear its own stillness. And on one of those nights, the sky broke open, not with thunder, not with fire, with listening. The stars brightened not visibly but inwardly. A warmth returned to the heavens, not like heat but like memory. The throne stirred, and a voice older than names, deeper than time, whispered, "Show me what I had not seen." And the angels, with wings of dust and memory, opened the scrolls of silence they had gathered. They unrolled prayers made of salt and bone. They held up songs hummed by dying lips. They revealed the invisible light hidden in the hearts of those who had no temple, no scripture, no voice. And the heavens wept, not because they had forgotten, but because they had not known that such beauty could grow in such ruin, that such purity could rise from such ash, that such faith could live even without the mirror. The angels were not praised, they were not crowned, they were only allowed to continue watching. But that was enough, because now the heavens looked again, but gently, with awe, with restraint, not forcing themselves upon the world, but waiting to be welcomed. And the mirror, it was no longer a thing, it had become a way, a path, a way of seeing not with eyes but with mercy. And those who walked it, even if they did not know, even if they did not believe, even if they had never heard the name of Solomon or jinn or angel, they carried it. In the way they lifted their children, in the way they forgave without being asked, on the way they sat beside the sick, not with answers but with presence. These were the new mirrors, cracked, imperfect, mortal, but honestly, one final story. There was a woman, her name is lost, but her song is not. She lived in a house with no roof. Her family had been taken, her land was stolen, her body was broken. And still, every evening she would sing, not to the stars, to the dust, because it had carried her footsteps and she felt it deserved a song. One night an angel sat beside her. He asked softly, gently, "Why do you sing to the ground?" And she answered, "Because everything else has left me, but the earth has not." She paused, then added, "And when I am buried in it, I want it to remember that I was kind." The angel said nothing. He only reached into his chest and placed a single shard of mirror upon the soil. It did not reflect the stars, only her face, tired, beautiful, unbroken. And in that moment, the sky watched her, not as ruler, not as a judge, as a student, learning once again how to love what is made of clay. So now tonight, wherever you lie, whether in comfort or ache, know this. You may be the mirror someone else cannot bear to face. You may be the reflection that teaches the heavens to see again. And your silence, your stillness, may be the most sacred scroll ever unrolled before the throne. Not every angel could look, but you still can. And maybe that is the holiest thing of all. They say there was once a city that cast no shadow. Its towers rose like prayers, tall, silent, unshaking. Its streets were paved with stone not quarried from earth but summoned from the unseen. Its gates bore no hinges, for they never needed to close. And when the sun passed over it, the city did not darken, only glowed. No map bears its name. No book remembers its location. But every soul at some point dreams of it, not because it was perfect, but because it was impossible. A place made not by hands of flesh, but by hands of smoke and whisper, built not for living, but for remembering. They cow. Diet Ubra, though no two tongues say it the same. The jinn built it long before Solomon was born, long before prophets walked barefoot on sacred sand, long before angels wept at the fall of man. It was not a kingdom, not a temple, not a fortress. It was something stranger, a city made to hold reflection, not in water, not in glass, but in the very air. The builders shaped each pillar with names that could not be spoken aloud. The domes were carved with light, not painted, not gilded, but with actual strands of sunlight woven into the stone. And beneath every street ran a hollow path where echoes were gathered and kept. Because in Ubra even the sound was sacred. But why build a city with no shadows? Because the jinn feared what they carried. Not curses, not evil, memory, too much of it. They had seen creation before the world was lit. They had wandered the spaces between stars. They had heard the voice that split the first silence, and they had not forgotten it. But no creature can carry such memory and remain whole. So they built a place to hold it, a city without darkness, a city that would carry their remembering so they could forget. And once it was built, they sealed it, not with locks, with silence. And they left, but memory does not rest, not even in stone. And though Ubra stood untouched, unseen, unspoken of, it watched every war, every betrayal, every prophet born and every prophet buried. The city saw them all, not with eyes, with presence, because reflection, when it is true, does not observe, it becomes. And Ubra began to hum, not loudly, just beneath the threshold of listening. A hum like breath behind a veil, like tears behind prayer, like the sound your soul makes when it finally stops pretending. It is said the city began to call for someone, not the jinn, not the angels, a man, one who had seen the mirror, one who had heard the sorrow of the earth, one who ruled not with fear but with stillness, Solomon. But at the time of its calling, he had not yet worn his full crown. He was still learning how to be silent, still learning how to weep. And so for many years the city waited. Its towers are unmoved, its wind untouched, its light trapped in memory, until one night a boy dreamt of it. a boy with a voice the birds listened to, a boy who prayed not with words but with awe. He stood in the center of a garden made of stars, and he saw a city rising from the earth breath by breath, like a name being remembered. And the city had no shadows, only mirrors, mirrors not on walls, mirrors in the shape of people, each one standing still watching him, each one holding something he had forgot, each one weeping, not in sorrow but in recognition. When he awoke, the air smelled like myrrh, and the wind trembled though no storm passed. He did not speak of the dream. He only wrote it, with ink made from olive ash, on parchment made from silence, and the scroll was buried, not on earth, in his heart, because Solomon had heard the call, and the city had opened its gates. But to reach it, he would have to walk where memory itself refused to go, through valleys where no voice returned, across rivers that remembered names not spoken in 10,000 years, over mountains that once held thrones of forgotten kings, and he would have to go alone. Because the road to Ubra was not made of stone, it was made of memory, and only those willing to see their entire soul could enter. The road was not made of stone, it was made of silence. Solomon walked with bare feet, and still the earth made no sound beneath him. The wind curled around his form but carried no dust. Even time itself seemed to hush, as if unwilling to interrupt what had begun. He was not searching, he was remembering, and memory, when it is true, always finds its way home. The first gate was not a door, it was a question, etched into air, visible only through the corner of the eye, a shape not seen but known. And the question was this: who are you when no one calls your name? Solomon stood before it, and the answer rose not from his lips but from his shadow. A shadow he had not seen for hours. It knelt before him, not as a servant, as a reflection. And the gate opened. The city of Ubera did not reveal itself in full. It emerged layer by layer, like a memory unfolding in the light. There were no guards, no signs, only stillness. The streets curved like calligraphy. Each turn felt like a verse from a forgotten scripture. And the air was ancient. It did not move, it listened. Solomon walked slowly, hands by his side, as if disturbing the air would unwrite something sacred. Every wall held inscriptions, not in letters but in emotions. He could feel them with his breath: grief, hope, longing. This was not a city of stone, it was a city of soul. He came to a courtyard, wide open, empty, except for 12 figures, tall, robed, faceless. They stood in a perfect circle, unmoving. Each bore a myrrh, or across their chest, and in each mirror he saw a different version of himself, one weeping, one laughing, one crowned in gold, one drowning in shadow. And at the center of the circle stood a 13th figure, no mirror, only light, a light that pulsed softly as if breathing. Solomon stepped forward, but the light whispered, "Do not enter with your name, enter with your remembering." So he closed his eyes. And he remembered, the wind that once sang in the hills before Jerusalem had a name only his mother knew. The lullaby his father hummed, not to comfort him but to remind himself that not all kings must be made of stone. The first verse he memorized, not with his tongue but with his tears. And the mirror he had once touched, the one that did not reflect but revealed. When he opened his eyes, the 13th figure was gone, and in its place a single door. No handle, no hinge, only breath. He stepped through and found himself not in a chamber but in a memory not his own. The sky was crimson, the towers leaned with grief, and a voice deeper than ocean, softer than sleep, said, "This is the day we sealed the city." Solomon turned. An old jinn stood behind him, but he was not old like men grow old. He was ancient like wind, like language before it learned to speak. He wore silence like a robe, and his eyes were full of stars. He gestured to the sky. Solomon saw it, a great mirror hovering over the city, not of glass, not of metal, of memory, thousands of memories rising like smoke, names forgot, sins unspoken, prayers never finished. And the jinn said, "We gave the city everything we could not bear to carry, and now it carries us." Solomon asked, "Why call me?" The jinn smiled, not with lips but with presence, "Because the city is full, and the world is starving." Suddenly the mirror in the sky cracked. a single line. Hair thin, and light poured through it, not sunlight, not flame, but understanding. It fell upon Solomon like rain, and in that moment he saw everything, not as it was meant to be. The prayers were left unfinished. The mercies never asked for it. The kings who died afraid, the angels who watched in silence, and in the center of it all a mirror. His mirror, Solomon's mirror, but different. It was not alone. It was made from shards, thousands of them gathered from hearts across time. And now they were asking something of him, not to rule, to remember. The jinn turned, voice now trembling, take it. Not to use, not to own, but to carry. Carry the reflection into the world. Let those who are willing see. Let those who are not be gently remembered. And when the world forgets again, bring it back. Solomon reached out, and as his fingers touched the light, the city vanished. Not like a dream, like a breath. And he stood once again in silence, bare feet, bare hands, but not empty, because now he carried Ubra within him, and his eyes no longer needed light to see. After Ubra disappeared, the wind did not return for 7 days, not because it had stopped, but because it was listening to the new silence that had wrapped itself around Solomon like a robe of unseen memory, a silence that did not belong to this world, a silence that remembered where it had been, a silence that now reflected, but not outwardly, inward. Solomon walked as a man who had seen the inside of a name and came back bearing its shape. He did not speak of the city. He did not describe its towers. He did not write down its truths, because some revelations are too sacred for paper. They are written in presence, not ink, lived, not spoken. And so he walked back through the world, unchanged in form, but utterly remade in stillness. People noticed, but could not name what they saw. The jinn grew quiet when he entered the room. The birds stopped their song when he sat beneath trees. The stones beneath his feet grew warm, as if they too remembered something they had buried for too long. And sometimes late at night, when everyone else was sleeping, Solomon would stare into water, not to see his face, but to check if the reflection was still his. Because when you carry a mirror in your soul, you begin to wonder who is watching from the other side. One evening a boy came to him, thin as a reed, eyes full of storms. He had no name, only a question. Why do I see things no one else sees? Solomon looked at him long and soft and did not answer with words. He took the boy's hand, led him to a still pool, and pointed. The boy looked in and gasped, not because of what he saw, but because the water did not show his face. It showed the person he would become if he chose mercy. It showed the man who would one day give his last piece of bread to an enemy. It showed the tears he would cry for the one who betrayed him. It showed the fire he would carry, not to burn, but to guide. The boy wept, and when he looked again, the water showed on. Lie him, but softer. As if the soul had exhaled, Solomon never explained. He didn't need to, because the mirror was not his to teach, it simply was. And now it has begun to awaken in others, not through magic, through stillness. A stillness that settled in people who had suffered, people who had lost more than they could carry, people who had chosen not to become what had hurt them. These became the new keepers. Their reflections began to shine differently, not bright, not proudly, just honestly. As if they too had glimpsed a city with no shadows, but with light comes resistance. And those who live in lies cannot bear to see the truth reflected. A group rose, whispered in corners, crafted fear out of things they did not understand. They said Solomon had changed, that his silence was not wisdom but danger, that his eyes carried something not of this world. They gathered mirrors, but only ones that showed faces, only ones that could be controlled, and they began to burn the rest. Reflections that showed pain, reflections that showed longing, reflections that showed mercy, all thrown into fire, and they came for Solomon, but he did not resist. He met them in the courtyard. No guards, no walls, only light, and he spoke softly once. Break every mirror you fear, but the reflection will remain because it no longer lives in glass. They could not touch him, not because he was protected, but because he had become invisible, not to sight, to fear. Fear could not understand what he carried, so it turned away. Years passed. Solomon ruled, Solomon wept, Solomon listened. And in his final days, when the light of his eyes grew dim, he summoned only one thing, not his advisors, not his riches, a bowl of water, and he looked into it for hours, until even his breath stilled. And when the jinn finally saw that he had left this world, they dared look into the bowl. It did not show his face, it showed the city, Ubra, whole, still glowing, still waiting, and in its center a reflection not of Solomon, of them, because now it was their turn to carry what he had carried, to remember what he had remembered, to build what he had rebuilt, not with stone, with silence. Some say Ubra rises again now and then, not in the desert, not in the sky, in hearts, hearts that hold grief without bitterness, hearts that forgive without forgetting, hearts that love without needing to be seen. And in those hearts the mirror returns, not as an object, as a presence. So tonight, if the wind feels too quiet, if your reflection seems to be waiting for you to speak, if the world softens just enough for you to feel the ache beneath your name, then perhaps the city has opened its gates again. And you are being asked, are you ready to remember? There is a story the angels tell each other, not in speech, but in silence. A story not written in any scroll, not recorded in any verse. A story that can only be remembered when no one is speaking, when no one is watching. It is the story of the book that was never finished, because every time someone tries to write it, the ink would vanish. It was said to be written before language existed, before birds knew how to sing, before even the sun understood its own orbit. It held no title, only presence, and its pages, they were made of something more fragile than parchment, prayer. Not spoken prayers, but the kind that lives beneath breathing. The prayers of children who have not yet learned disappointment. The prayers of those who do not believe they deserve to be heard. The prayers that rise not from lips but from the ache behind the ribs. These were the pages. And the ink. The ink was made from memory, but only memories never spoken aloud. Because the moment something is said too loudly, it begins to die. This is why the book could never be completed, because to write it down was to reduce it, and the truth it held could not be reduced. Solomon did not find the book. It found him, on a night when the stars had all turned away, when no wind dared move, when even the jinn had fallen asleep in their towers of flame. He was alone, but not empty, and in the quiet between one breath and the next, a shadow fell upon his lap. Not a scroll, not a tablet, a folded thing, heavy with silence. He opened it, and found only one word written upon its first page: wait. He did not speak. He did not question. He closed the book and placed it on the floor beside his bed. By morning it was gone. It returned a week later, this time with 2 words: still waiting. And so began the slow unfolding of a sacred rhythm. The book would arrive. Solomon would open it. Sometimes there would be a phrase, sometimes just a feeling, sometimes nothing, and still he never forced it, because he understood this was not a book to be written. It was a book to be remembered. Once, years later, after a long night spent watching a man be executed unjustly, Solomon wept. And in the morning the book returned Ith one sentence, even God listens to those tears. Another time he sat with a dying woman who had no family, no grave, no name. She smiled just before her last breath and said, I think I was loved once. That night the book returned with a single page soaked in something that smelled like rain. No words, just presence. The book began to change. Its edges softened. Its weight grew. And sometimes when Solomon opened it, the air itself would shimmer as if the sky were pausing to look over his shoulder. The jinn noticed. They grew uneasy, not because they feared the book, but because they recognized it. Long ago, in their own forgotten legends, they had spoken of a memory that cannot be written, a remembrance so complete, so sacred, that to capture it would break the world. They warned Solomon. He only smiled. I do not wish to capture it, he said, only to be captured by it. One night the book arrived open. A single line pulsed at the top of the page. The mirror is not the last memory. And below it a space, as if waiting, waiting for something to be written, but Solomon could not. His hands trembled, his voice stilled, because he understood what the book was asking. It was asking him to pour something of himself into the silence. Not wisdom, not judgment, not prophecy, but pain. And so, after hours of stillness, he picked up a single reed, dipped it in oil and ash, and wrote, "I was not always kind." The ink did not vanish, it glowed softly, and then dissolved, not into the page, into the air, as if taken. He did not cry, he did not pray, he only breathed, because he knew now the book remembered him. It is said that the book still exists, that it travels from heart to heart, from prayer to prayer, that it visits those who hold regrets too quietly, that it listens at the edge of dreams. And when someone dares to speak a truth they never thought could be loved, the book turns a page and write it down, not in ink, in grace. The book had no spine, but it stood, no cover, yet it held the world. And though no fingers turned its pages, they moved with the wind of remembering. Solomon no longer waited for it. It came when it wished, like an old friend, arriving when the soul had been cracked just enough to receive. Sometimes he'd find it at the foot of his prayer mat, other times in the folds of his robe. Once he found it in the hand of a child who offered it to him without knowing why, eyes wide with dreams they could not yet speak. It always returned where sorrow had been spoken in silence, not sorrow that seeks to be cured, but sorrow that asks only to be held. One page appeared after a long day of judgment. Solomon had passed sentence on two men, one guilty, one innocent. Both had walked away in silence. That night, the book opened with only a breath on the page. Not a word, just a breath, drawn long like someone gathering the courage to forgive themselves. And Solomon understood there are truths so fragile they can only live between words. Once he asked it quietly beneath the stars, "Who writes these words?" The book did not answer, but that night it opened to a page that simply said, "Every soul you've forgotten to remember." He did not ask again. The pages changed texture with time. Some were dry and thin, like the hands of the elderly. Others were soft and wet, like the eyes of a mother burying her firstborn. Once he turned a page and found it warm, pulsing like a heart. That night, a widow who had spoken no words in 40 years suddenly sang a lullaby in her sleep. No one heard it but Solomon, and he wept, because he recognized the melody. It was the same he had once heard in the arms of his own mother, before prophecy had taken her voice from him. The book became his companion, but never his possession. Because the book could not be owned, it belonged to the silence between people, to the regrets that never found air, to the forgiveness that lived in shaking hands, to the whispers children speak to trees when they think no one is listening. It was made of sighs, not because sighs are weak, but because sighs are the last thing left when a soul is too tired to cry. One day the book arrived soaked, not in water, but in memory. The page smelled like blood and jasmine. Solomon opened it slowly, knowing what kind of story it would carry, and he read. There was a woman who loved her enemy, not because he changed, but because she remembered what he once could have been. He closed the book and did not speak for 3 days. A scholar once came to him, young, sharp, proud. He had heard rumors of a book of God's secrets. He demanded to see it. Solomon smiled and handed him the book. The scholar opened it and found only blank pages. He flipped page after page, eyes growing furious. "There is nothing here," he shouted. Solomon took the book back gently, opened it to the same page, and read aloud, "Pride cannot read what the broken whisper is." The scholar turned red, then pale, and left. Years later, Solomon heard he had become a healer, one who never spoke above a whisper and who carried no books, only bandages and time. The jinn feared the book, but they also revered it. They would not touch it, but they would sit near it in silence, hoping perhaps one day a page would turn for them. Once it did, and when it did, the entire room filled with smoke. Not choking, not heavy, but sacred. And in the smoke, a single word hung: return. The jinn bowed and vanished. There were pages that held laughter, soft, foolish laughter, the kind that escapes a person when they forget the world is watching. One page had a child's drawing scratched in earth, barely formed. But when Solomon touched it, he remembered something he had not thought of in decades: the sound of his father's robe brushing past olive branches. A memory so simple, so unimportant, and yet it made him cry more deeply than prophecy ever had, because the book remembered everything, even what you forget to cherish. And so it grew, not in size, in depth. The book was no thicker than it had ever been, but each page seemed to hold entire lifetimes. And sometimes when Solomon touched it, he could feel thousands of hearts beating through the paper, but still it refused to be finished. No matter how many times he tried to complete a thought, to write a final word, the ink would dry too quickly, or vanish before the line is done. And he came to realize the book was not meant to be concluded, because the story of remembering never ends. The older Solomon grew, the lighter the book became, not because it had lost anything, but because it had given so much away. Each page was no longer just memory, it had become breath, passed from soul to soul, carried in the silences between strangers who had once loved and forgotten each other. It was no longer a book of Solomon, it has become a book of the world. He stopped trying to understand it. Understanding had its place, but this book did not belong to the mind. It belonged to the part of the soul that still remembered how to kneel without asking why. The part of the soul that still trembled at the sound of birds singing after war. The part that saw a candle flickering in a ruined house and called it sacred. One evening the book did not arrive. The stars did. The wind did. But the book stayed silent. Solomon waited. Hours passed like years. And just as he stood to leave, he heard something. A tear, but not his own. A page weeping. He turned, and there it was, open but no words, only water pooling softly across a page that shimmered like dew at dawn. He reached forward, and in the center a line appeared. The last page is not for you. He blinked, and then another line, because the last page is never written. Solomon sat beside the book and spoke aloud for the first time in days. Will I forget all this when I die? The page shimmered again, but gave no answer. Instead, a soft image appeared, a hand, a child's hand, holding another, frail, wrinkled, veined with time, and Solomon understood. He would not remember, but someone would, because memory does not need to be personal to be sacred. Sometimes your story lives better in someone else's breath. The next day he gave the book away, not to a scribe, not to a king, to a woman who cleaned the temple steps. She did not know how to read, but she knew how to weep, and the book opened for her the moment she touched it, because tears are a kind of language too. She saw her son, the one she'd lost in the river when the waters took more than fish. She saw him, grown, smiling, placing jasmine on her grave. She did not ask what it meant. She only closed her eyes and kissed the page. That kiss remained. The next time Solomon saw the book, the imprint of her lips still shimmered, not in color, not in shape, but in warmth. And he realized the book was not made of parchment, but of prayers, and not just his, but all of theirs, all of ours. In the final year of his life, Solomon wrote nothing. He had nothing left to say, not because he had no more truth, but because he had finally become one with it. He would sit for hours with the book in his lap, not reading, not writing, just listening, to the turning of unseen pages, to the prayers of strangers whose names he would never know, to the memories of birds and mothers and wanderers who died unnamed, but not unremembered. And on the final night, the book did not arrive, not by hand, not by dream. It was already there, within him. The last line he ever heard came not from a page, but from the wind curling around his sleeping body. It said, "The mirror shows what is, but the book carries what was loved despite it." When the jinn came to find him, he was leaning as always, silent, still, gone. But in his lap there was no book, only the scent of jasmine, and the sound of pages turning where no book could be seen. They searched for it for years, for centuries, but it was never found again, because the book had returned to where it always belonged, not in your hands, not in temples, not on shelves or scrolls, but in the hollow of hearts that choose to remember what the world wants to forget, in the eyes of the widow who still prays, in the silence of the child who still hopes, in the breath of the sinner who dares whisper, "I was wrong." In the moment after forgiveness, when neither person speaks but both know, that's where the book is now. That's where it always was. And the last page, it still waits, not for the perfect, not for the pure, just for someone willing to be seen. And maybe tonight, just maybe, it's waiting for you. Before stone touched stone, before stars were even assigned their stations in the sky, there was a throne, not built, given, not by kings, not by prophets, but by stillness itself. It hovered above a plain where nothing grew, a space between time's first heartbeat and the unfolding of form. And it was said softly, reverently, and only in the breath between angelic breaths, that this throne was made to hold one who could not yet exist. Not a ruler, not a messenger, not even a servant, but a soul who would carry contradiction like a flame in cupped hands. One who could weep while commanding, one who could build while remembering what had been broken, one who could reflect and not shatter. And so the throne waited, not for a name, but for a silence deep enough to sit upon it. The jinn knew of it. They had glimpsed it while wandering the edges of creation. Its shape was strange, its weight is unbearable, not heavy, hollow, as if it could only be filled by a sorrow that had not yet been born. They never spoke of it aloud, because they feared it not for its power, but for what it revealed, that even the divine waits for something it cannot name. The angels too passed by it, but none sat, not out of pride, out of reverence. They circled it in silence, their wings tucked, their voices folded like cloth, and they said, "It belongs to the one who does not want it." When the stars were placed, when the sky was stretched, when the oceans were poured from cupped hands, the throne remained untouched. Time passed by, prophets rose and fell, floods swept, fires whispered. Still the throne waited. And one day, long after it had been forgotten by almost everything that had once dared remember, a voice came, not from above, from beneath. A voice that spoke not with command but with ache, not a cry, a remembering, and the throne shifted, ever so slightly. It was Solomon, not yet a man, not yet a ruler, still just a child who spoke to trees and asked the wind where it had learned to sing. He did not know what he was seeking. He only knew there was a weight inside him that had no name, and he carried it with the gentleness of someone who feared it might break. He wandered beyond the edge of maps, beyond where even the jinn walked, until one night, when even the stars had forgotten to shine, he found it. It did not glow, it did not hum. It simply stood low to the ground, wide as mercy, quiet as the grave. Solomon stepped toward it and felt nothing, no power, no pull, only presence. And in that moment he understood this throne was not meant to lift him. It was meant to remind him of what he could not carry. He did not sit, he knelt. And in that kneeling the air changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly. Softly, as if creation itself had sighed, a release. As if something that had waited too long had finally been seen, and the sky lowered itself, not in reverence, not in surrender, in remembering. The throne shimmered only for a moment, and then sank slowly into the ground, not as punishment, not as a loss, but as a gift. Because Solomon had not claimed it, it had claimed him, not with gold, not with praise, but with silence. And from that silence something began to grow, a kingdom. Not of walls and weapons, but of breath, of stillness, of mirrors. When he returned, he told no one of the throne, not even the jinn, but they knew, because the way he walked had changed. Not heavier, not taller, softer, as if the ground itself was now familiar with his grief. As if the earth had whispered back, "You may not sit upon it, but you have become it." And in the ages that followed, whenever a leader rose too high, whenever a man built thrones from fear, whenever a voice declared itself unbreakable, a storm would come. Suddenly, gentle, and beneath the thunder a whisper, "The throne does not rise for the proud." They asked him once in a whisper, out of earshot, behind veils and curtains, "What gives you the right to rule?" Solomon did not lift his eyes. He only touched the earth beside him, pressed his fingers into the soil, held up the dust, and let it scatter. The wind took it, and he said, almost too softly to hear, "Nothing." This was not humility, this was a memory, because the only thing the throne had taught him was that true power does not rise, it lowers, it kneels beside the forgotten, it is unclean, it forgives where no one asked to be forgiven, it walks with silence and lets silence speak. Solomon's court became a strange thing, not built of golden stone or screaming guards, but of shadows that knew their place, of winds that brought stories instead of war, of silence that wrapped around the pillars like morning fog. The throne in his hall was carved, yes, high and beautiful. But he never sat in it for long, because the real throne, the one that had sunken beneath the sky, lived not in wood or silver. It lived in him, in the way he judged not with law but with listening, in the way he wept after passing sentence alone where none could see, in the way he allowed even the jinn, proud and burning, to speak before he answered. One day a stranger came, not rich, not wise, a man whose hands were calloused from carrying water too far, whose eyes never looked up. He entered the court but did not bow, not out of defiance, out of exhaustion. The guards moved, but Solomon lifted his hand. The man stood there and said only one thing: "My son has stolen. I do not ask for mercy, I ask to be punished, because I taught him what the world cannot unteach." No one breathed, and Solomon slowly stepped down from his seat. He knelt before the man and whispered, "You have already carried the sentence, let me now carry the remembering." He placed his hand on the man's back, and it is said that night the stars above Jerusalem shone low, as if they too wanted to kneel beside that kind of sorrow. The throne no longer meant separation. It meant return, return to the earth, return to the ache, return to the truth that no soul is whole, but every soul is held. And so Solomon reigned, but no one could truly say when his reign began, because he never claimed it, it claimed him. In every moment he listened to a lie and still chose mercy. In every pause between judgments where he let his heart ache before his tongue moved. Every time he looked at a mirror and saw not his face, but the face of one he'd once wounded, and prayed for their healing. The jinn asked once, half mocking, half curious, "Why do you not sit like kings before you?" He answered, "Because I am not trying to be seen." And they bowed, not to power, but to presence. His throne was unlike any other. Not because of what it was made of, but because of what he carried when he left it. Stories, shadows, prayers. He would walk into the city and sit beside weavers, ask children what they fear, bring bread to the one who insulted him yesterday. He would take off his rings when he prayed, because the throne, that buried, breathing throne, had taught him, the weight of gold can drown a prayer. And so the throne beneath the sky remained hidden, but it was not lost. It pulsed beneath the soil, whispered beneath olive roots. It breathed beneath minarets before they rose, and it waited still for the next one who would not seek it, because only the one who carries silence in their bones can sit where angels would not dare. Some say the throne will rise again, but not in palaces, not in kingdoms, in a child who chooses kindness over glory, in a widow who sings to her grief instead of cursing it, in a beggar who gives half his bread to one with no hands to eat. They say, when it rises again, it will not lift a man above others, it will sink into his heart, and make him forget that he was ever meant to rise at all. There was something buried beneath the throne, not stone, not bone, but memory, a memory so old even the earth had grown quiet around it. It did not whisper, it did not warn, it only waited, because beneath every throne there is a mirror, not one that reflects the face, one that remembers the weight. Solomon knew this, not from teachings, not from visions, but from the aching in his chest every time he knelt to pray, the ache that said, "This is not yours, but you must still carry it." He had walked through palaces, heard his name carved in foreign tongues, watched armies bow at his breath, but he never forgot the silence that rose from the throne that sank, because that silence was alive. And one night it spoke, not aloud, not with sound, but in the language of dust curling around a flickering lamp. And it asked him, "Will you look beneath?" He waited until the moon forgot its shape, until even the olive trees slept without dreaming, and he returned alone to the field where the throne had vanished. The ground looked unchanged, but he knew. So he placed his palms on the soil and asked no questions. I only breathed, and the earth parted, not like a wound, like remembering. Beneath the grass and root and stone there lay a mirror, but this one had never been touched. It pulsed. Dimly, not with light, with grief. It showed not what was, not what will be, but what had never come to pass, a boy never saved. A war never started, a prayer never finished, a love never spoken. Solomon stared, and the mirror without shame asked him, "What have you abandoned?" He saw it all. The faces of those he could not help, the promises broken in silence, the tears left unanswered, the child who had stood outside his gate 3 days in a row and left unseen. He wept, not as king, as a man. The mirror pulsed again, and this time it showed him himself, but not who he was, who he could have been. If pride had never entered, if ambition had never whispered, if power had never made him forget the weight of a single glance from the forgotten, and he could not look away, because the mirror beneath the throne shows what might have been. He whispered to the soil, "Am I still worthy?" The wind did not answer, the stars did not blink, but the mirror shimmered, and for a moment, just a moment, it showed him as he was kneeling, broken, barefoot on holy dust. And above his image, written in no language known to man or angel, "This is what worthy looks like." He covered the mirror, not to hide it, but to honor it. He whispered a prayer made only of breath, and let the earth close again. He did not try to remember what he saw, he let the mirror keep it, because some truths are too sacred for recall. They must be left in the soil, planted like seeds. When he returned to his court, he said nothing, but he changed. The way he touched a child's shoulder, the way he waited an extra breath before judging, the way he paused when someone said, "I almost didn't come," because now he understood. Beneath every throne is a mirror of mercy, one that reflects not what you've done, but what you've left undone. And in that reflection there is still time. Years later, as his hair grew gray and the weight in his chest grew slow, he returned to the field. The earth welcomed him, softly, warmly, as if it had been waiting only for him. Did not uncover the mirror. He sat beside it and whispered, "I forgive myself for forgetting." The wind replied, and for the first time it sounded like a smile. The throne had never been about ruling, it had always been about remembering. And the mirror beneath it, it does not ask for perfection, only presence. So tonight, if your heart feels heavy, if something you forgot long ago presses at the edge of your breath, perhaps the mirror is walking beneath you. Perhaps the throne was never far. Perhaps all it was waiting for were you to kneel, not in shame, but in memory. And in that memory you may yet be crowned. Long before the age of kingdoms, before scrolls found ink, and before temples knew songs, there stood a tower. It did not rise in pride. It did not reach to challenge the sky. It did not shine. It simply listened, because it had been built not to be seen, but to remember. The tower had no name, because names are for things that begin and end. And the tower had always been. It stood where wind once taught prophets to pray, where the stars first whispered to the sand, where Jinn spoke softly before learning flame, and within its walls, carved by breath, not hand, were names, not written, heard. The tower heard them all. The name of the first soul to rise from clay, the name of the last leaf that would fall before the world sleeps, the names of those who would build and those who would burn, and it held them, gently. Like a mother holds the laughter of a child long after that child is gone. But no one remembered the tower, because it did not ask to be remembered. It waited for the one who would not seek power but meaning. Solomon found the tower by mistake, or so he thought. He was chasing the echo of a name he could no longer recall, a name he had heard in a dream, soft as linen soaked in tears. He walked for 3 nights, no fire, no food, just the name circling in his mouth like a prayer he hadn't earned. And on the 4th morning, just as the sky began to forget how to hold its color, the tower stood before him. Not tall, not grand, just a present, and around it silence. The kind of silence that comes when every sound is listening. He approached with bare feet. Dust clinging to him is like a memory. He did not ask what it was. He only placed his hand against the stone, and the tower sighed, not like stone, like someone remembering a name too holy to say aloud. The sigh entered him. And Solomon fell. He dreamt, but not of visions. He dreamt of names, thousands, millions, all spoken not with tongues but with longing, names never said aloud, names spoken once and then forgot, names changed by pain, names erased by power. And one name, the name he had been seeking, rose among them. It was not his name. It was not God's. It was the name of a girl, one he had passed years ago, weeping beneath the columns of a half-built sanctuary. She had no home, no kin. She had asked him only for a glance, and he had not stopped. She had died that night. Her name had gone unsaid since. But the tea, Ower had heard it, and when Solomon awoke, the stone beneath his cheek was wet with sorrow. He did not speak. He only pressed his forehead to the wall and said, "Tell me all the names I've forgot." The tower said nothing, but the wind began to shift, not fast, not fierce, just soft, like the breath of someone waking from a long sleep, and it carried whispers, not words, reminders, names of those he judged too quickly, names of those who had blessed him in silence, names of enemies who had once prayed for his safety. The names circled him, not to shame, to soften, to let the hardened parts of his heart begin to melt. He stayed 3 days. Each day he listened. And each night he wept, not in grief, in gratitude, because the tower did not judge him for forgetting. It only held what he had left behind. On the 3rd day the tower offered him something, a stone, but not ordinary, a stone with a name carved inside it, not on the surface. A name no longer remembered by any voice in this world. And the tower whispered, "Carry this. Let someone's memory live in your silence." He took it, wore it around his neck, and from that day forward, he never walked anywhere without listening first, because he had learned every place remembers, every place speaks, and the ones who listen become mirrors too. Solomon carried the stone with him everywhere, not because it held power, but because it held presence. And presence, he had come to understand, was the one thing the world feared to lose. The stone had no mark, no weight beyond its memory, but sometimes when the wind passed close it would hum, not aloud, inside him, as if the air itself were trying to speak through his chest. He asked the jinn once, "Do you know the name inside this stone?" They recoiled, not from fear, from reverence, because the jinn remember names differently. They do not speak to them, they carry them like a scent, like shadows. And one among them, an elder, eyes clouded by centuries, whispered, "That name has not been uttered since Babel cracked." Solomon lowered his gaze. "Then let me be the one who does not speak it but remembers it anyway." And the wind responded, not in a gust, in a hush, as if drawing breath to begin the long, slow telling of every name the world had lost. The tower did not fade from his memory. It stood within him now, its stones echoing in his ribs, its silence coiled beneath his voice. And slowly he began to hear the language it had once spoken, not in words, but in the space between words, in how a mother calls her child in the dark, in how a stranger asks for water without knowing the tongue, in how a man cries into a garment that once carried someone's scent. That was the tower's language. It lived not in books, not in scripts, but it aches. Solomon began to dream of names, names that had never belonged to kings, names that had never passed through the palaces, names of women who died giving birth in the wilderness, their children never learning where they came from, names of slaves who whispered poetry to themselves in chains, names of wanderers who died mid-prayer before they could say Amen. And one night just before dawn, the mirror he had hidden away, the one deep in the vaults of his sanctuary, began to flicker. He approached it, and it did not show his face. It showed names, scrawled in light, moving too fast to read, too deep to pronounce. The mirror was remembering him. He touched its surface and asked, "Where are they now?" The mirror did not answer, but something in Solomon's breath changed. He exhaled, and with that breath the glass pulsed, as if something old had been acknowledged, not healed, not fixed, just seen. And that is when the wind began to change, not across the city, across the world. It carried something ancient now, something soft, something urgent. It carried names. And suddenly children began dreaming of voices they had never heard. Old men began to hum lullabies no one remembered teaching them. Strangers locked eyes and, without knowing why, said aloud names they hadn't spoken in decades. because the wind was speaking, and it was asking, "Will you carry what was forgot?" Solomon did not answer with law, he answered by building, not a monument, not a tower, a space, a place with no doors, no roof, no rules, only silence. And in the center a single stone, not his, the tower's, the stone that had been given to him now returned to the earth. He called the place nothing, but the people named it Beit Alisma, the house of names. Anyone could enter, but they had to be quiet, not out of fear, out of listening. And many came, a woman who had forgotten her father's face, a man who had betrayed a friend and longed to speak their name just once more, a child who remembered a sibling lost before speech. They would sit in the center, say nothing, and leave lighter, because the wind remembered them, and the tower, from wherever it still stood hidden in the folds of creation, would whisper their names back to the sky. Solomon never preached, he never recorded what was said there. He only added one line to the gates of the silent sanctuary: "Enter if you are ready to remember someone who never got to be remembered." That was all, but that was enough, because some truths do not need temples, they only need space, and silence, and someone willing to hear the name behind the tears. They say that when rain first fell upon the earth, it carried more than water. It carried memory, not just of rivers waiting to be born, but of names that had never been spoken aloud. Each drop held one, and when the tower was first shaped, long before the mountains found their weight, it listened to that rain. And the rain whispered, "We remember." Now in the twilight of Solomon's years, the rains had changed. They came softer, later, with sighs instead of thunder, and when they touched the soil near the house of names, they did not rush. They stayed, as if they too wished to linger, to wait with those who waited, to kneel beside those who could not remember what they had lost. On one such night, Solomon stood barefoot beneath the rainfall, his garments soaked, his lips silent, and he watched as a child no more than 7 wandered into the sanctuary. The boy held no lamp, spoke no words. He only carried a small wooden bowl, empty. He placed it in the center of the courtyard, then sat beside it, head bowed, and said nothing. The rain fell. Drop by drop the bowl filled. And Solomon understood. Each drop was a name. The child rose, took the bowl, and left. He never looked back, but the stone beneath him pulsed just once with warmth. And Solomon knew a name had returned to its rightful place, not in memory, in presence. That night Solomon knelt, and for the first time in many years he prayed not for guidance but for forgiveness, not for his errors but for all the names he had failed to carry, all the names he had not heard. The rain fell harder, but it did not sting. It held him like an old friend finally returning home. He whispered into the earth, "If I forget again, let the wind remember. If I fall asleep, let the rain awaken the names. And if I pass before I can return to the tower, let the tower return to them." And something stirred in the sky, not thunder, not light, a kind of stillness. The kind of stillness that hovers before a name is spoken for the first time in decades. And Solomon knew the tower had heard. In the years that followed, names began appearing in strange places, carved into trees no one had touched, etched into clay pots buried beneath market stalls, spoken aloud by birds at dawn. Some thought it magic, others thought it was madness. But those who had heard the tower recognized the language. It was not new, it was simply returning. One woman, blind from birth, came to the sanctuary and stood in the rain. She tilted her face upward, smiled, and said, "He never left, did he?" Solomon asked her gently, "Who?" She touched the rain upon her lips. "My brother, the one who drowned. His name is on every drop tonight." She turned, walked away, and behind her the stone beneath her feet glowed faintly. Another name returned. Solomon did not speak of these moments publicly. He knew they would not be believed, but in his private scrolls, never read, never copied, he wrote only this: "The tower still hears, and now the wind is no longer alone." Every heart that remembers without proof is part of its foundation. On the last day of spring that year, the rains came again, but this time they did not fall from the sky. They rose from the earth, mist curling upward like forgotten names returning home. And those who stood still long enough heard something impossible, the sound of stone weeping, not in grief, in relief, because even stone wants to be known. Even stone holds stories. And when a name returns to its rightful place, not in books, not in tongues, but in being the tower within the earth size, and another part of the world is healed. So tonight, if rain finds you, if it taps against your window like an old friend calling without words, open it, let it in, and ask, whose name do you carry without knowing? The answer may not come in language, but if your chest softens, if your breath slows, if something in you begins to ache without explanation, then you have heard the tower. And it has heard you. It began where nothing should have lived, in a hollow scorched by 7 fires, where jinn once danced in war and even angels turned their wings away. A land stripped bare not by time but by sorrow. And yet something grew, not quickly, not proudly, but surely, a single stem, pale, bent by silence but alive. No one planted it, no water touched it, no wind carried its seed. It rose from beneath the ashes, drawn not by sunlight, but by a memory too deep to fade. It was not a garden yet, just a whisper, a prayer that had rooted itself in To soil no one believed in anymore. The jinn were the first to notice. They passed through the wasteland without stopping, as they always did, for it was cursed. But one among them paused. He felt warmth. Not heat, something softer. He touched the ground, and it hummed, not with power, with forgiveness. He turned to the others, but they had gone, so he stayed. And for the first time in 1,000 years he knelt, not to worship, to listen. He placed his hand upon the soil and said, I remember what we did here. The ground pulsed, and from the stem a second leaf unfurled. He returned the next night, this time with silence in his heart. He did not speak, only sat beside the stem, and the earth remembered. The next day the stem stood taller, and its color changed, not green but silver, like moonlight hiding beneath grief. Solomon heard the tale days later, whispers brought by birds who had never flown that far before. He left at once, alone, carrying no scrolls, no staff, only his breath, because he knew if the earth had forgiven itself enough to grow again, he must answer. When he arrived, he did not recognize the land. He had passed through it once years ago, and even then it smelled of smoke and sorrow, but now it smelled like waiting. He found the jinn still kneeling, eyes closed, hands deep in the soil. Solomon said nothing. He only sat beside him, and the ground warmed, more leaves, soft, thin, each one humming a song no ear could hear. The garden had begun, but not like others. It did not chase the sun. It listened to the dark, because this garden had learned light is not always gentle, and darkness is not always cruel. In the following weeks others came, quietly, one by one. A woman who had buried her child on this land. A man who once threw torches here, now holding only tears. A child born blind who said the soil here made her dreams softer. No one spoke. They only sat. And the garden grew. Vines crept across bones that had not yet decayed. Flowers bloomed from forgotten wounds. Trees rose not tall but low, bending in humility, and their bark shimmered as if soaked in starlight. The garden had no gate, no name, but those who left it carried something with them, a silence that soothed, a memory that healed, a whisper they could not explain. And in their presence others softened, because the garden did not only grow in soil, it grew in people. Solomon returned often. Not as ruler, as a witness. He never touched the plants, he only listened, because the garden did not speak in language, it ached. In the ache of those who had destroyed but longed to rebuild, in the ache of those who had lost but chose to return anyway. And the earth forgave them, not with flowers but with roots, deep ones, roots that remembered sorrow without turning it into bitterness, roots that held memory not as burden but as breath. One day a boy brought a stone to the garden. He placed it at the base of a tree. When asked why, he simply said, "So the tree will never be alone." And the next morning, fruit bloomed on its branches, soft, round, tasting rain and remembering. And from then on the garden fed whoever entered it, but only if they wept first, not out of pain, out of readiness, because the garden would not give to the proud, only to those who had known the dark and stayed kind. It began slowly. At first no one noticed. But then in the stillness of dawn, when the world was between breath and day, someone heard it. A sound, not wind, not birdsong, something deeper. The sound of leaves singing, not with words, but with memory. Each leaf, each branch, each root held a melody too fragile to be spoken aloud. And it did not rise like a chorus. It fell like a sigh or a name whispered in sleep. Soft, wounded, holy. The song was not always the same. Some days it sounded like a mother humming to her unborn child. Other days it trembled like an old man weeping where no one could see. Sometimes it was laughter, faint, distant, like joy remembered after years of forgetting. No one could predict what the garden would sing, because the garden only sang what had been buried, and what had been buried was endless. Solomon listened for hours. He once asked a bird perched on a silver vine, "Do you understand the song?" The bird tilted its head, then replied, "I do not understand it, but I remember it." That was when Solomon realized the song was not meant to be understood. It was meant to be recognized. The garden was not teaching. It was an awakening things we thought we had lost: compassion, longing, gentleness. And in that awakening it gave more than fruit, it returned. A woman came one evening hunched, wrapped in black, her fingers trembling. She carried nothing. But as she entered the garden, she dropped to her knees. The soil beneath her glowed faintly. "The leaves are still." And then began to hum, low, slow, deep, a new song, one the garden had never sung before, a song of grief too long buried, of a child lost in war whose name had not been spoken in 40 years. The woman wept, not loudly, like rain falls in a desert, too slowly to be noticed, but enough to awaken what sleeps beneath. She did not speak. She only lay her cheek to the earth and said, "I thought you had forgotten." And the tree nearest her bent, not from the wind, from listening. The next morning blossoms bloomed in a circle around where she had knelt, pale blue. Tasting of memory. The jinn called them Nabat al-Gaib, the plants of the unseen. They said no human tongue should try to define them, only carry them, only remember. More came, some limped, some crawled, some spoke names not heard in generations, and always the garden listened. It never asked for repentance, never demanded sacrifice. It asked only for one thing: truth, not public truth, private truth. The kind that makes your hands shake when you say it aloud. The kind that lives beneath pride, beneath shame, beneath words. The kind that still burns quietly, even when the fire has long gone out. Solomon once knelt before a sapling growing near the edge of the grove. It was smaller than the rest. Its leaves curled inward. He touched it gently and whispered, "What pain do you carry that no one else sees?" And the leaves opened, just once. And from within them the faint scent of his childhood rose, warm bread, his father's breath after night prayer. The sound of sandals brushing across the marble as his mother approached. Memories he had long forgot, but the tree remembered, because the garden remembered everything, not in judgment, in stillness. And in that stillness every soul was made whole again, not by being mended, but by being seen. There were no plaques in the garden, no names carved in stone, no borders, only breath. And when the wind passed through its branches, the leaves rustled like prayers too ancient for language, and the garden sang. And in its song the world softened, just a little, just enough to remember how to listen. So if you ever find yourself surrounded by silence that feels alive, if you pass through a place where the air carries something deeper than scent, if your feet slow without reason and your breath deepens, perhaps you've stepped where that garden still blooms, unseen, unowned, still singing, still remembering, still waiting for one more soul to whisper their truth, and let the leaves carry it home. One evening, when even the jinn had fallen silent, Solomon returned to the garden barefoot. No guards, no offerings, no words prepared, only breath. Because tonight he was not a king, he was not a prophet, he was simply a man who needed to be heard, and the garden knew. The trees leaned as he walked, not in reverence, in recognition. They did not bow to his crown, they bowed to his ache, because the garden was not impressed by power. It bloomed only for pain carried without bitterness. And Solomon had carried much. He walked to the oldest tree, the one that had grown where no seed had been planted. Its trunk was twisted like a soul that had healed after breaking. Its branches bore no fruit, only shade, shade that remembered things no light had ever seen. He sat beneath it and placed both hands upon the roots. They pulsed warm, soft, slow, like the breath of something sleeping. And then the leaves above him still. The birds fled. Even the wind paused. Because something was rising from below, not roots, memory, memory that had slept for centuries, memory so deep it had never been spoken even by the earth. It moved like smoke beneath the soil, like sighs drifting through bones. It reached up and touched him, not his body, his heart. And Solomon remembered, not visions, not prophecy, something older. He remembered what the world was before time began to divide it, before thrones, before angels, before jinn. A world where all things were soft, where names had not yet needed defense, where prayer was not something spoken but shared. And at the center of that world, a garden, not this one, the first, the one lost before the first sorrow fell from heaven. And in that garden everything grew without needing to be taught, because truth was the only soil. Tears ran down his cheeks, not from sadness, from return, from the ache of remembering something too sacred for this world. He whispered, voice cracking, "Did we come from that garden?" And the roots answered, not in language, in warmth. They wrapped around his fingers, entered the space behind his ribs, and held him, not tightly, just enough. Enough to let him know we never left. He closed his eyes, and in the silence he heard it, not the garden song, but the song beneath it. A single note, low, steady, endless, the sound of creation breathing. The sound that had hummed in the darkness before the first command. And the garden was singing it back. That night Solomon did not rise. He slept beneath the tree, and those who passed him did not disturb, because even they could see something holy was happening, something not meant to be touched, only witnessed. When the sun returned, it found him still there, eyes closed, face soft. A leaf had fallen on his chest, silver, veined with light. He took it gently, held it to his lips, and kissed it, not in reverence, in gratitude. From that day forward, the garden changed. Its trees grew deeper, not taller. Its fruit began to shimmer with a soft gold hue. Its air grew heavy, not with heat, but with remembrance. And anyone who entered felt watched, not judged, just seen. They say the roots of that garden are no longer bound to the soil. They've grown upward, threaded through the air, braided into clouds, woven into the folds of the night sky. And sometimes, when the stars flicker strangely just for a moment, they are not flickering. They are responding to the roots that now touch them, to the garden that grew without light and returned to heaven without leaving earth. It is still there, even now, not marked on any map, but carried in those who have wept honestly, carried in those who have knelt without needing to be seen, carried in those who have chosen gentleness over glory. You may have stepped through it before and not known. You may be carrying its seed even now. And one day, when your silence is finally deep enough, when your breath is heavy with truths you never dared speak, a leaf will fall at your feet. And the garden will whisper, "We've been waiting." He was not born with silence. He chose it, long before the world knew his name, long before kingdoms stood or rivers bowed to his command, before angels walked at his side and the wind brought him secrets. He walked alone, and he did not speak, not because he could not, because he had heard something no voice could carry without breaking. The boy who would one day become a prophet was quiet from the moment he first opened his eyes. The midwives thought he was ill. The birds disagreed. They circled above him in soft spirals, wings trembling as if in prayer, because they knew this boy had not forgot. He still remembered the sound behind all sounds, the voice that spoke before creation. And having heard that, what words were used? He wandered among fig trees and dried riverbeds, listened to the way dusk curled when the sun bowed, watched ants carry crumbs with the reverence of kings. He watched the world breathe, and he breathed with it. When others spoke to him, he listened with his whole body, his hands, his spine, his ribs, all attentive, as if sound entered him not through ears but through presence. And when he finally spoke once after 7 years of stillness, it was not loud, It was not grand, it was barely more than a sigh, but the sky shuddered. They say the clouds lowered themselves that day, that the wells, long dry, began to hum with hidden water, not because his voice held power, because it held restraint. People began to gather around him, not out of fear, not out of command, but because in his silence they heard their own hearts again. He reminded them of how to breathe without noise, how to cry without shame, how to remember without speaking. And still he rarely used words. Instead, he sat with the broken, ate with the forgotten, stood in markets with his palms open, receiving not coins but stories. And when the children came to him, they did not play. They simply curled at his feet and slept. Because something in him made even dreams feel safe. He once stood before a crowd of men arguing over justice. They demanded his verdict. He said nothing. Instead, he picked up 2 handfuls of sand. He handed one to the man who had been wronged, and the other he let fall slowly back to the earth. No one asked what it meant. They all understood, because truth, when seen, needs no explanation. Solomon heard of him, a prophet who barely spoke. He traveled for days to meet him. When they met, they did not speak for hours. They simply sat, 2 men holding thousands of voices within them, finally allowed to rest. That night Solomon asked, "Why did you stop speaking?" And the prophet smiled, a smile like cracked olive wood, aged honest. He whispered, "Because my voice was making God smaller than he is." Solomon bowed, not from duty, from recognition, because he too had made the mistake of trying to contain the divine in language. And he had learned slowly, painfully, that silence remembers what speech forgets. They parted with no farewell, only an embrace. And the wind that day carried no dust, only stillness. The prophet returned to his mountain, and over the years people stopped visiting him with questions. They came only to sit, to breathe, to allow their burdens to be carried by someone who had no need to name them. He grew old. His beard turned silver, his back bent like the crescent moon. But his silence never cracked, not even once, not even in agony, because silence was not his vow, it was his prayer. And when he passed, there were no wails, no chants, no marble stones, only the sound of water dripping from leaves and one final breath that felt like a whole world exhaling. His grave was never marked, but to this day there is a mountain where no birds sing, no jinn pass, no fire crackles too loudly. And if you sit long enough upon that stone, you'll find your heart beating slower. Your hands are loosening, your voice trembling, not from fear, but from remembering how soft you used to be. That was his miracle, not walking on water, not healing the blind, but reminding the world that God still whispers, and we've simply been too loud to hear. There were moments when he opened his mouth, but no sound came, not from hesitation, not from pain, from reverence. Because some truths were too sacred for syllables. Some prayers are too heavy for human tone. And in those moments, the world leaned closer. Because the silence he offered was not emptiness. It was an invitation. A woman once came to him, her hands bruised from labor, her eyes dimmed from waiting. She fell to her knees and said, "I have no words left to ask for help." He did not move, only reached forward and touched the space between her shoulders. And something passed from him into her, a stillness, a breath, a recognition. She wept, not from sadness, from being seen. And when she left, her hands were no longer shaking. Another day, a child came, angry, burning, lost. He shouted. He cursed the sky. He cursed his own name. The prophet let him scream, let him spit his pain into the air like sparks. And when the boy had emptied his fire, the prophet stood, walked to a patch of dry earth, and poured water from his own cup. The ground drank deeply. The boy watched, then whispered, "You forgave me with your silence." The prophet turned, eyes soft as the inside of a date seed, and nodded. He understood something few ever learned. Words are a kind of hunger, but silence is a kind of home. The jinn would not speak in his presence, not out of fear, out of awe, because they too had been made of flame, and they recognized what it meant to contain that fire without letting it burn the world. They came to him in dreams, not to ask, to listen, because his breath carried verses not yet revealed. and the wind that circled him was said to echo names, names no longer remembered by angels. Offered thrones. He turned them down. He was offered scrolls of wisdom. He left them unopened. He was offered followers. He said, "Follow your breath, follow your ache, follow the quiet." He wrote nothing, but still every stone he sat on remembered him. Every fig tree near his dwelling grew twice as sweet. Every grain of sand beneath his path hummed softly when touched by the night wind, because even silence leaves a trace. Solomon sent him a final gift once, a scroll wrapped in linen, blank. On it was written, "You have written more with silence than I have with all my words." The prophet smiled, pressed the scroll to his chest, and set it upon the fire, letting the smoke carry it skyward as if even paper must vanish when faced with a truth too gentle to keep. In the final year of his life, a great drought swept the lands. People begged him to call for rain, to shout, to invoke, to command. He did none of those. He simply stood, lifted his hands to the sky, and breathed. The wind rose. Not fierce, curious. It curled around his fingers, dipped into his palms, and left. 3 days later it returned. It's full of rain, soft, persistent, restoring. And when the first drops fell, he knelt, not in triumph, thanks, for he knew even the sky needs silence before it remembers how to weep. And so he lived, and so he died, with few words but many echoes. To this day, they say if you enter the caves beneath the southern cliffs and stay silent long enough, you will hear his breath. Still traveling through the stone, still carrying truths too fragile for form, still reminding the forgotten that God does not always roar. Sometimes he waits, in silence, in softness, in the spaces we've been too afraid to enter. And if you close your eyes tonight and say nothing and let your breath carry what your heart has never dared say aloud, you may find him beside you, not to speak, only to listen. And perhaps that's all you've ever needed. After he passed, no one dared raise their voice in the valley where he had walked. Even the birds grew quiet. Even the river forgot to rush. Because some silences are not left behind, they stay. They linger in branches, in shadows, in the breath before prayer. And those who listen closely can still hear him, not in words, in presence. They built no shrine, they marked no stone. But over time, those who had once sat at his feet returned to the places where he had once stood. Not to speak, to wait, to feel, and slowly something strange began to happen. The air shimmered, not visibly, spiritually, a kind of warmth that had no heat, a kind of stillness that stilled the heart before the body. And when people entered that place, their shoulders dropped, their eyes filled, their thoughts slowed, because his echo had not gone, it had become the air itself. Solomon too returned in secret, in the final years of his reign, when his beard had silvered and his voice carried more grief than command. He came alone, no guards, no procession, only a handful of figs and a silence he had saved for this place. He sat beneath the cedar tree where they once spoke, and the tree remembered him. Its branches bent low as if to touch his crown and remind it, you were a child once. You were silent once. You were loved without being needed. He placed the figs on a flat stone, whispered the name of the prophet into the wind only once, and for the first time in years, Solomon wept without resistance. No one saw him, but the earth did. And beneath him, the roots of the mountain moved slowly like breath through ancient ribs. And the mountain gave something back, not a vision, not a miracle, just a single flower growing from stone, white, soft, unwilted. Solomon touched it with shaking fingers, and in that moment he remembered the first time he felt God. It was not in a temple, it was not during war. It was in a dream when he was still a boy and someone held his hand without asking for anything in return. He left the flower there. Let it bloom for the next wanderer, because some gifts are not meant to be kept, only passed on. Over the years, the prophet's silence was studied, copied, twisted. Fears, some called it weakness, others mystery, but the ones who knew, the ones who had sat with him, they never tried to explain it, because they knew his silence was not the absence of speech. It was the presence of something deeper, a language made of sighs, of glances, of the still moment between grief and forgiveness. One day a man arrived, loud, proud, wounded by praise. He stood in the valley and shouted, "Why did he say nothing? Why did he die with his mouth closed?" No one answered. The wind moved through his cloak, the trees swayed, and then quietly, without warning, a child nearby began to laugh. Not at the man, at the leaves. They shimmered without effort. The man stopped. I looked at the child, and something cracked inside him. Because in that moment he understood, joy needs no explanation. That night he sat at the cedar. He didn't ask questions, he only wept. And when he left, the ground beneath him bore a faint glow. Another soul softened. Another echo received. The prophet who spoke without sound became more than a story. He became a way. A path not walked with footsteps, but with restraint, with reverence. With the courage to let the world be what it is, broken, beautiful, unfinished, and still choose to listen to it anyway. It is said now that when a child is born in silence, without a cry, with only wide, wondering eyes, the angels look to one another and say, "He has touched him." Not to mark, not to command, only to remind there is still one who listens. And so tonight, if you feel quiet without knowing why, if your heart seems to hush itself, if you walk outside and the wind wraps around you like a cloak you did not expect, perhaps he is near, not to teach, not to save, only to keep you company, while your soul remembers how to breathe without words. Long before stars took their place in the sky, before constellations told the stories of the brave and the broken, there was one star that did not rise, not out of defiance, not out of slumber. It simply waited. As if the sky was too bright, too loud, and its light is too honest to be thrown among the rest. They called it Sakina, though the name was never spoken aloud. It lived in the space between verses, in the stillness after truth is told, and the breath that follows. The other stars shimmered, they danced, they declared. Sakina did none of these. It hovered below the veil of night, close to the earth, near the waters where prophets once washed their hands before revelation. It did not move, because it remembered something the others had forgot. Sometimes light must kneel before it can guide. Solomon learned of this star from a shepherd, a child who walked with goats and dreams and dirt under his fingernails. He pointed one night to a patch of sky that seemed just slightly warmer, not brighter, just waiting. "That one doesn't want to be seen," the child said, "but it sees everything." Solomon watched it for years. He saw how the night bent around it, how it softened the edges of silence, how no owl flew beneath it and no wind passed above it. It was a light of presence, not of spectacle, a star not for the eyes but for the soul. One evening, deep in his solitude, Solomon whispered toward it, "Why do you not rise?" And though the sky gave no answer, the mirror in his sanctuary flickered, and for a moment his own face disappeared, replaced by a weeping girl, a well filled with unseen hands, moments of mercy the world had not noticed, moments only Sakina had watched. The star had not refused to rise, it had chosen to remain close, to walk among the dust, to press its light into the cracks of broken things, to enter wounds not to heal them but to keep them company, because not all light is meant to blind darkness. Some light only wants to sit beside it. Solomon understood, because there were nights when he could not even pray. Nights when the burden of knowing was too great, when the ache in his chest did not match the strength in his hands, and on those nights he would look for Sakina and find comfort in knowing at least one star does not rise above us, it stays with us. There is a legend. A man, nameless now, walked across deserts searching for purpose. He lost family, he lost language, he lost his reason for walking. But one night, as he collapsed beside a dune, his eyes caught a flicker low in the sky, not sharp. Soft, warm, he did not speak to it, he simply wept, and it is said the star wept with him. In that moment a truth settled into the sand. Sakina does not light the way forward, it lights the place where you stop running. Years later, when Solomon's hair was threaded with sorrow, when his staff grew heavier and the mirror had begun to dim, he asked the star one final question: "Will you rise when I am gone?" And the air around him shifted, not with wind, with reverence. And though the star gave no sign, his mirror reflected a child yet unborn weeping beside a well, offering water to someone who had once hurt them. And Solomon smiled, because he understood. The star will rise only when mercy becomes the light we follow. There came a night when the stars turned their faces from the earth, not in anger, not in judgment, but in mourning. Too many cries had risen, too many names buried in silence, too many acts committed beneath the pretense of light. And so the sky closed its eyes, all but one, Sakina, the star that never rose, the one that never climbed, never claimed, never shouted. That night it was the only one that stayed, low, quiet, refusing to abandon what others could no longer bear to see. The city below had burned. Ashes clung to rooftops like regrets too heavy to bury. The air was thick with the weight of questions no tongue could frame. And in the quiet after the flames, a child wandered through the rubble. No shoes, no name. Only a broken flute held close to his chest. He did not cry, he did not call, he simply sat among the ruins and looked up. The sky was blind, except for one flicker near the edge of the horizon, a flicker that did not move. It did not promise, it did not scold, it simply remained. The child raised the flute to his lips. No sound came, the wood was split. The breath is too weak, but he kept blowing. I kept hoping, kept offering silence as if it were a song. And the star, the one who had never risen, shimmered. Not like lightning, not like fire, like breath caught in the lungs of heaven. And in that moment the child knew he was not alone. Far away, Solomon stirred from restless sleep. He had dreamt of water turning to dust, of names unraveling, of songs forgotten mid-verse. And yet at the end of the dream he saw the star, low, near, patient, and heard a whisper soft as wind through olive trees. One has not forgot. He woke up, wept, and returned to his mirror. But the mirror showed no image, only warmth. That day he summoned his scribes, asked them to bring no parchment, only listen, and he said, "Write nothing today, just remember one star stayed with us." They did not understand, but the scribes obeyed, and that memory passed mouth to ear through time and forgetting until it became a lullaby sung by those who had nothing left. One star stays, one light stays low, one name stays close. Centuries passed. The city was rebuilt. The child grew old. His flute never played, but his silence became sacred. Because in the breath he gave that broken song, Sakina had chosen to remain. Not in the sky, in him. And from that moment on, those who grieved without answers, who waited without end, who forgave without being asked, began to feel a warmth at their side. Not loud, not seen, but present. And when they looked upward and saw nothing, they smiled. Because they remembered the truest light does not rise. It rests beside you in the dark. Solomon grew old, his voice softened. His dreams grew stranger, filled with unnamed children and trees made of breath. And in each dream Sakina glowed, always at the edge, never center, never demanding, only watching, only warming, only waiting. He once asked the wind, "Will she ever rise?" The wind replied not with words. With a stillness so profound his heart forgot its ache for a moment. And he knew the answer. Sakina does not rise. She waits for us to lower our crowns. She waits for us to kneel beside those we forgot, to sit without answers, to love without being right, to choose mercy when vengeance feels holy. She waits for us to stop asking for signs and become them. So if the night feels too quiet, if the stars above seem too far, if the light in your chest flickers but will not go out, look not up. Look within. You may find Sakina there, not burning, just breathing, with you. Solomon's final years were a kind of quiet the world did not understand. Not silence from weariness. Silence from fullness. He had walked through gardens no one had seen, spoken to winds that remembered creation, touched the mirror that saw what even angels dared not name. And yet it was the star that stayed low, the one that never rose, that lingered deepest in his bones. Sakina, that unrisen light, that patient flame. That sacred presence that chose not the sky but the soul. He stopped speaking of prophecy, not because he doubted, because he understood the holiest truths can only be passed through presence. He no longer taught with parables. He sat with the dying. He shared bread with the forgotten. He wept when no one was watching, and every night before his final prayer he would look out his window and whisper, "Stay." To a light the world never noticed, to a star that still waited. He wrote one last scroll, not for scholars, not for kings, for the child who would one day sit beneath the ashes and still offer a song. He called it simply, "The Light That Chose Us." It was never finished, because he knew Sakina cannot be written, she can only be felt. After he was gone, they searched the heavens. They mapped stars, they chased signs, they asked for wonders, and never saw the flicker hovering just above the hills, the same light that once warmed the hands of a broken prophet as he forgave a world too loud to hear him. One night, long after Solomon's name had faded from common tongue, a woman stood alone near a dry well. She had lost her home, her son, her voice. And yet she sang, softly, a melody with no words, a rhythm born of ache, not art, and above her no stars, only Sakina, still low, still waiting, still near. And as she sang, the well, dry for generations, began to echo, not with water, with breath, as if the earth itself remembered her song, as if grief offered gently could stir the bones of what was once holy, and the star pulsed, once, a single beat, like the exhale of something sacred. Some say Sakina will never rise, that she is a promise not of power but of presence, a vow that the divine does not only dwell in height and thunder, but also in quiet hands and soft glances and prayers whispered through cracked lips. Others say she has risen, not in the sky, in us, in every soul that chooses gentleness where it is not deserved, in every heart that listens before it speaks, in every step taken toward someone no one else will sit beside. And maybe they're right. Maybe Sakina isn't a star. Maybe she's a part of God's breath, placed within us to remind the universe that not all light needs to be seen. Some light only wants to love in silence. So tonight, if the sky feels empty, if your heart carries something unspoken, if you've waited for a sign that never came, let this be it. The star did not rise because she never left. She chose to stay low with you. There is a mirror that has never been touched by hand, never carved, never summoned. It was not born in Solomon's time, nor kept in the vaults of kings. It lies beneath all of it, under the thrones, under the gardens, under the sky. A mirror that reflects not the past, not the present, but the last breath of every soul just before they return. It sleeps, but not like stone. It sleeps like a witness, still waiting to testify. The angels do not speak of it because they have seen it. And it does not shimmer, it does not break, it does not lie, it simply waits. And it will be the last thing this world remembers. Solomon saw it once, not with eyes, not in dreams, in silence. He had sat alone, old, weary, forgotten by many who once cheered his name. And he whispered, as he often did, "Let me see what no one will believe." And something stirred, not the sky, the earth. A crack opened, not in soil, but in time, and beneath it light, but not a light that reveals, a light that remembers. He did not descend, he simply felt it rising. This mirror had no shape, it was not glass. It was the memory of everything this world had meant to be, but forgot. He wept, not because it was beautiful, because it was true. And the truth was too soft to survive. He saw it then, just for a moment. A world not scarred by pride. A world where prophets sat with strangers and listened before teaching. A world where kings walked behind their servants. A world where silence was not feared. Where mirrors showed mercy before clarity. He reached out his hand, but the mirror whispered, "Not yet," and vanished. He never spoke of it again, he simply grew quieter. The kind of cue yet that makes others feel safe enough to speak. The kind of quiet that becomes a home for names no one else has time to hear. The mirror that will awaken last has no prophecy tied to it. No angel was assigned to guard it, because it does not need protection. It is the protection for every forgotten act of love, for every apology whispered into a pillow, for every moment someone chose stillness instead of power. It remembers all of it. And one day, when the world has finally exhausted every illusion, every crown, every war dressed up as righteousness, the mirror will open. And it will show no judgment, but remembering, not of the mighty, but of the kind, not of the victorious, but of the soft-spoken, not loud, but of the faithful who lived quietly, and that will be enough, more than enough, because this mirror will not reflect what you were told to become. It will reflect the moments when you chose love anyway. Solomon died with his hand open, not holding anything, just reaching gently toward what the world could have been. And somewhere deep beneath where his bones now sleep, the mirror hums, still waiting, still remembering, still full of light. It is written nowhere, but it is known in the breath of those who listen. There will come a day not of reckoning, not of fire, not of trumpets or thunder, but of stillness. A day when the winds forget to run and the seas remember how to be glass again. A day when no one shouts, when even prayer is whispered without urgency. And on that day the mirror will open, not like a gate, like a sigh. It will not rise, it will not break, it will simply no longer hide, and it will reflect us not as we wish to be seen, but as we truly were when no one else was watching. The moment you shared your only meal with one who hated you, the breath you gave to a drowning soul who would never thank you, the tears you wiped from a stranger's eyes when your own vision was failing. These moments will shine brighter than empires, and the angels will not judge, they will weep, because even they, with all their wings and light and closeness to the throne, had not seen how holy we could become when no one was watching. That day the mirror will speak, but not in words, in reminders. It will return every name we forgot to cherish, every face we overlooked, every hand we could have held but didn't, and it will say, "These were the moments I waited for." No books will be opened, no scales weighed. Because when truth is full, judgment becomes unnecessary. The mirror will show us and we will recognize ourselves. Not all will rejoice. Some will tremble because power cannot stand in front of truth, and crowns will crack like dried clay beneath rain. But even then, even in that trembling, the mirror will not accuse. It will only ask, will you kneel now, not because you must, but because you remember who you were before pride? And many will, not from fear, from softness, from the memory of how it felt to be a child, before names were currency and faith became theater, from the ache of every moment we longed to be loved without needing to win it. Solomon foresaw this, not clearly, not fully, but enough. In his last days he spent hours watching ordinary people, the way a mother adjusted her daughter's scarf in the market, the way an old man held his friend's shoulder longer than necessary, the way two workers argued, then broke bread together without apology. He smiled, because he knew this is what the mirror will show, and it will be enough. The jinn in secret gatherings still whisper in the mirror. They say when it awakens, even fire will kneel, because truth is not the opposite of darkness. Truth is what remains after darkness is no longer needed. And you will not be called to stand. You will be invited to rest, to sit, to weep if you need to smile if you remember how. Because in the presence of the mirror, nothing needs to be performed. Everything already is. The mirror that will awaken last does not care what you accomplished. It only asks, were you kind when it cost you something? And if the answer is yes, even once, it will glow. And in that light, the world will end not in destruction, but in remembering. But what if it never opens? What if the mirror remains beneath the soil of time, breathing softly, never seen, never lifted? What if the last light never rises, the last name never spoken, last breath never reflected? Would the world still be worthy? Would your story still matter? Would all that aching, the prayers whispered into cracked pillows, the mercy chosen in secret, the forgiveness offered with no one to witness still count? Yes, because the mirror does not need to awaken for your soul to be known. It already knows you. And you, with all your tremble, your stillness, your flaws carried like sacred scrolls, you have already stood before it. Every time you choose to listen instead of speak. Every time you kiss the hand that once struck why. Oh, every time you hold silence instead of offering proof. You stood before the mirror and it remembered you. Solomon never saw it open. He died with his head bowed and his hands empty. But the mirror still glowed where he fell. Not for him, for us, for those still walking, still wondering if love is enough, still wondering if gentleness matters in a world crowned with noise. And this is the secret. The mirror is not buried beneath time. It is buried inside you, and the day it opens will not be the end of the world. It will be the moment you finally forgive yourself. That is the true awakening, not fire, not thunder, but mercy that begins within. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the breath beneath your ribs begins to soften, know this: you have already been seen, not by watchers, not by kings, but by the mirror that reflects your soul exactly as it is and loves it anyway. There is nothing more to do, no final judgment to prepare for, no proof to gather, no mask to wear. Just rest. Let your ache be known. Let your breath be a prayer. Let your memory rise from within. Because somewhere deep beneath the gardens, beneath the towers, beneath the thrones, the mirror is humming. And its light waits not to punish, but to welcome you home. And if the silence never breaks, would your faith still rise in the dark? If the fire never returns, would you still kneel in the ashes? What if the last word God spoke to you, goodbye? Would you still whisper back, I love you, and listen? In case he stayed to hear it, what if your story was never forgotten? What if the moments you lived in silence, when no one saw you, when no one thanked you, when you still chose to be kind, were the most divine? What if there really is a mirror, not waiting to reflect your flaws, but to return your forgotten light? And what if it already has? Breathe now. You are not being judged. You are being remembered. And your breath right now is part of a prayer written long before your name was spoken. Let sleep take you softly. Let mercy fold itself around your ribs. Let silence rise like a psalm. You are not lost. You are not late. You are already known. You are already loved. Good night. And if this finds you in darkness, let it be your mirror.